It was one of those chilly spring Saturdays in northern Ohio, when the wind cuts just enough to keep your jacket zipped and your guard up. Jenna, a sophomore at a nearby college, had taken a weekend babysitting gig through a parent referral site. The family lived in a quiet, upscale neighborhood with neatly trimmed hedges and wide driveways that echoed every footstep. Inside, the house smelled like vanilla candles and fresh balloon rubber. The birthday party was already in full swing when she arrived. Kids were screaming with laughter, running wild through the house with frosting on their fingers and helium balloons bobbing behind them like noisy shadows. Jenna kept an eye on the chaos while texting her roommate between passing out juice boxes and keeping kids from tipping over a rented bounce house set up in the backyard. The parents floated in and out, distracted and cheerful. At some point, someone mentioned a clown was supposed to show up around 3. Nobody seemed to know who booked it. By the time the clown finally showed up, the sky had started to shift into that late afternoon shade of pale gray, where the light seems to flatten and shadows start to feel heavier. He didn't knock. He just appeared in the backyard gate, already in full costume, holding a sagging duffel bag and twisting a long balloon between his fingers. His suit looked oversized and wrinkled, like it had been stuffed in the trunk of a car for hours. The colors were faded, and the makeup around his mouth had begun to crack. He didn't introduce himself. He just gave Jenna a stiff nod, like he'd been expected. At first, nobody noticed anything off. The kids screamed when they saw him and swarmed around like moths to a porch light. He made balloon animals and pulled a few raggedy scarves from his sleeves. The parents stayed inside, sipping white wine and cleaning up cake plates. Jenna stayed near the back patio doors, watching. Something about the way he moved felt wrong. He didn't speak, not once, not even when a kid asked for a giraffe. Just nodded and worked quietly, twisting and handing off balloon shapes like a machine. His eyes barely tracked the children, but every time Jenna looked up, he was staring at her. At first she thought she was imagining it. She would look up from checking her phone and catch his gaze right on her face. No smile, no blink. Just holding eye contact for a second too long before looking away. Once, she caught him watching her through the reflection in the sliding glass door. That was when her stomach flipped. It wasn't just staring. He was watching her in the way someone watches for a specific moment. A specific signal, like he was waiting. She mentioned it quietly to the father when he came out to collect garbage. He looked confused and said they hadn't hired a clown. They thought she had. She laughed, assuming he was joking, but his face didn't change. He looked toward the clown, who was now sitting cross-legged in the grass with 3 kids on his lap. The father went back inside. The clown looked up again, right at her. The party started to thin out. Parents came to collect their kids. Wrapping paper littered the yard. Someone cried over a popped balloon. Jenna glanced out the window again and saw the clown standing alone in the backyard. No kids around him, no parents nearby, just him, facing the window, still holding that same balloon giraffe. Only now it had something drawn on it. Sharpie lines that looked like a face, a woman's face. When she blinked, the balloon was gone and so was he. As the last car pulled away and the yard grew quiet, Jenna locked the back door and started cleaning up the party mess. Crumpled streamers clung to the corners of the kitchen. The half-eaten cake sat lopsided in its tray. Her phone buzzed on the counter, but she didn't look. Something felt off. The house had gone too still, too empty. She glanced out the window one more time and her breath caught. The clown was back. He was standing at the edge of the yard by the fence, arms limp at his sides, head slightly tilted like he was listening to something only he could hear. He wasn't holding any props now, just watching the house. Jenna stepped back and grabbed the house phone, but the line was dead. She grabbed her cell, but it was frozen on a black screen. No service. She moved fast, locked the side door, pulled the front curtains shut, double-checked every latch she could find. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding so hard she felt it in her throat. As she reached for the upstairs lights, a soft tap came from the glass sliding door behind her. She turned slowly. The clown stood inches from the glass. His face was smeared. The makeup had melted down around his chin. His eyes were wider now and glassy. He lifted his hand and pressed something against the glass. A balloon, twisted into the shape of a woman curled up on her side. Black marker drawn over the face. Her face. Jenna's face. She staggered back, and the balloon popped with a loud snap. She ran to the living room and heard the gate creak open. Then came the heavy sound of boots crossing the deck. Slow, deliberate. She grabbed the kid's baseball bat from the hall closet and backed toward the stairs. Upstairs was darker now. All the light from earlier had drained from the sky. Shadows stretched across the walls like they were leaning in. Halfway up, she heard the back door creak. Not rattle, not shake, just creak open. Smooth and easy like someone had a key. Her blood ran cold. She ducked into the nearest room and crouched behind a dresser. The sound of footsteps moved through the kitchen, then the hallway, then the stairs. Each one heavier than the last. The floorboards groaned under the weight. She covered her mouth, tried not to breathe. The doorknob turned once, slowly, then again. It didn't open. He didn't force it, just stood there, breathing on the other side. She could hear it, raspy, uneven. It went on for what felt like forever, then silence. When she finally got the courage to peek out, there was nothing in the hallway. But the door across from hers stood open. Inside was the balloon, twisted again. Same shape, same face, this time with a red smear across its mouth. And on the wall above it, in red letters that hadn't been there before, was one word: soon. The police arrived almost an hour later. Jenna had already walked through the house twice with a kitchen knife in one hand, and her phone finally back online in the other. Every door was locked, every window shut. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints, no fingerprints, just the balloon, still curled on the floor with her face drawn in ink that had started to bleed into the fabric of the carpet. The red smear was still fresh, not paint, not marker, something thicker, something that stained her fingers when she touched it without thinking. The cops walked through the place like they didn't believe her, took a few statements, shrugged at the lack of evidence, said maybe it was a prank, maybe a jealous ex. They left without taking the balloon, without checking the attic, without noticing that the word written in red on the bedroom wall had faded slightly since they arrived, like it had been wet when she first saw it, like it had been written minutes before she found it. She never went back to that house. She blocked the number that had sent her the babysitting request. It kept calling late at night for the next 3 weeks, always at the same time, always silent, until the last call when she picked up in a panic and heard her own name spoken in a low, broken whisper. Then nothing. Now, months later, she still finds balloon scraps in her mailbox. Twisted shapes, small faces drawn in black marker with smudged lines and open mouths. No return address, no pattern, just showing up every few weeks. Sometimes tied to her car mirror, sometimes left on her front porch. Always quiet, always waiting. She never found out who sent the balloon clown or how he got inside without breaking a single lock. The face drawn on the balloon kept changing over time, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying. Once it looked like it was sleeping in her bed. It was just past midnight when Rick pulled into a nearly empty rest stop off exit 12. He'd been on the road for 10 straight hours, hauling freight through rural Pennsylvania. The lot smelled like old diesel and damp leaves, and the only light came from buzzing sodium lamps that cast long orange shadows over the cracked pavement. The diner was closed, but the gas station stayed open late. Rick grabbed a coffee and a pack of jerky from the counter. As he walked back to his rig, the wind picked up and something caught his eye near the highway entrance. A man in a faded chicken mascot costume was dancing alone on the grass beside the road. The costume was oversized and dirty, and the feathers looked clumped and matted from rain. Rick assumed it was some dumb promo for a fast food joint and didn't think much of it. But something about the way the guy moved made him pause. The arms were too stiff. The rhythm was off, and the man never looked away from him. Rick kept walking toward his truck, but that damn mascot stayed planted by the shoulder, slowly swaying back and forth like some broken wind-up toy. The costume looked worse up close. The beak had a crack running through it, and one of the eyes was sagging like the foam inside had rotted. Rick shook his head and climbed into the cab. He figured it was just some local kid pulling a stunt or maybe a guy high on something. Either way, he was ready to get moving. The rig rumbled to life, and the dashboard lights glowed faint orange across his face. As he eased onto the on-ramp, he glanced back once more. The mascot was standing at the edge of the road now, dead still, just watching his truck disappear into the dark. A few miles later, the road dipped into a tree-lined stretch where the highway lights thinned out. Rick adjusted the radio, but all he got was static. He turned it off. The hum of the tires was the only sound left, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring if you sit in it too long. Then came a knock. One solid knock against the back of the cab. Just once. He froze, gripped the wheel tighter. The truck was moving steady. There was no turn-off, no place for someone to jump in. He checked the mirrors. Nothing behind him. Just the empty stretch of road and the vague shadow of trees racing past. At the next rest area, he pulled off and grabbed a flashlight. Walked around the truck slowly. Opened the trailer doors. Nothing inside except freight. No signs of damage. No footprints in the dirt. But taped to the passenger side door with old yellow masking tape was a piece of folded paper. The kind of paper that had been crumpled and uncrumpled too many times. He peeled it off and opened it slowly. Just one sentence written in smudged red ink. Stop next time. Rick stood there for a long second with the paper trembling slightly in his fingers. The wind picked up again and carried the scent of something rotten, like wet fur and old meat. He slammed the door and got back inside. Locked everything twice. He didn't see anyone nearby. Didn't hear anything strange. But as he pulled back onto the highway, he spotted something far down the shoulder. It looked like feathers, just barely moving in the tall grass. The chicken costume, lying on its side. Only this time the head was turned toward the road, and one arm was raised like it was waving at him. The mouth hung open just wide enough to see a row of real human teeth. The rain came out of nowhere. 1 minute the road was clear and dry, and the next it was hammered by thick sheets that blurred the windshield and swallowed the lane markers. Rick slowed the rig to a crawl and leaned forward to get a better view. The wipers dragged across the glass with a squeal that grated his nerves. He flipped on the high beams, and just as he rounded a slow curve, he saw something ahead, a figure standing dead center in the lane, arms outstretched, feathers soaked and clinging to its body. The chicken costume was darker now, heavy with water, and it was holding something in one hand. Rick slammed the brakes, and the trailer groaned behind him. The rig skidded slightly and came to a hard stop a few yards short of the figure. For a moment, everything froze, just the hiss of the rain and the engine ticking under pressure. Then the figure moved. Slowly, one step, then another. The hand with the object came into the light. It was a rubber glove filled with something wet, something that dripped onto the pavement in thick red smears. The mouth of the costume sagged open wider now, and the same teeth Rick saw before were still there. Only this time they were moving, chattering, like they were grinding against each other. Rick threw the truck into reverse and backed up hard. Tires screeched and the trailer swayed. But when he looked again, the figure was gone, vanished into the storm. He breathed heavy, sweat stinging his eyes. He shoved the shifter into gear and hit the gas. The rig roared forward, and for a moment he thought it was over. Then a loud bang echoed from the sleeper cabin behind him. Something had landed on the roof. The weight shifted, slow, dragging steps across the top of the cab. Rick White knuckled the wheel and checked every mirror, but saw only rain and darkness. Then the passenger door handle clicked. Once, twice, then again. It was locked, but something outside kept trying. The movement above him stopped. He held his breath. The roof creaked under the pressure of whatever was up there. He reached for the CB radio, but all he got was silence. Then came the voice, muffled but close, right by the windshield. Not yelling, just speaking, low and steady. Not a single word made sense. It was gibberish, spoken in a flat tone over and over, like a chant, like a message he wasn't supposed to understand. Rick hit the horn. The sound shattered through the cab, and the figure was gone, just gone. He kept driving for hours without stopping. Didn't pull over until the sky turned pink and the rain finally let up. When he checked the side of the truck at the next way station, he found long, wet streaks down the door, and a small white feather stuck under the windshield wiper, the kind they use to pad mascot suits. Only this one was soaked in something thick and brown that smelled like copper and rot. Rick never told the company what happened that night. He filed it under road fatigue and let the dispatcher think it was just a storm delay. But something changed after that trip. He started checking the roof of the cab before every haul. He stopped driving at night unless he had no other option. His sleep got shorter, lighter, the kind where every sound makes your eyes snap open and every dream leaves behind a metallic taste. Weeks later, he found the glove again. Not the same one from the road. This one was fresh, propped carefully on his fuel tank step with water still clinging to the fingers. Inside was a folded receipt from a diner he hadn't visited in months. It had his order on it. His name was scribbled at the bottom in red. Not pen, just color. The kind that sinks too deep into paper. Sometimes now, when he drives past rural exits, he spots something out of the corner of his eye. A shape by the tree line. A flash of white feathers. A face too still to be a sign. He never stops, never turns around. But the feeling rides with him, heavy in the cab, like someone is sitting just behind the curtain in the sleeper, breathing soft, barely loud enough to notice unless you listen too long. Rick never figured out how that diner receipt ended up inside the glove or why it was still warm when he touched it. He started hearing faint clucking sounds through the radio late at night, even with the volume turned off, and they only stopped when he closed his eyes. Chris had worked the night shift at Sunridge Mall for almost 2 years. The place had shut down months earlier, but a few stores still rented space for small private events. On quiet nights like this, he was the only person on duty. The air always smelled faintly of floor polish and old popcorn from the theater that closed down last winter. The halls were long and dim with weak security lights humming overhead and the occasional flicker from dead bulbs that had never been replaced. Tonight he was scheduled to clean up after a birthday party held inside one of the old anchor stores. Cheap decorations still clung to the walls and glitter stuck to his boots as he pushed the mop down the hallway. A few stray balloons bobbed near the ceiling, most of them deflated and sagging. He thought he was alone. The whole building felt hollow, until he noticed a faint circus tune drifting through the air. The circus music was soft at first, like it was playing through a wall or a closed room somewhere deep in the mall. Chris paused near the entrance of the old department store and tilted his head. The sound had that warped, scratchy quality, like it was coming from a broken speaker or one of those wind-up music boxes you find at thrift stores. He figured it was maybe a leftover toy someone forgot during the party, something battery-powered still kicking through its last minutes of life. But when he walked through the party space and checked the tables and trash bins, he found nothing. Just crushed cake boxes and plastic hats and a half-deflated balloon tied to a folding chair. The music had stopped by the time he circled back to the entrance. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, like something had noticed him. He tried to brush it off and went about his routine, emptied the bathroom trash, ran the floor buffer through the central corridor. But every now and then, he would hear it again, just a few notes. The kind that make your skin crawl, not because of what they are, but because they feel out of place. He radioed security but got static. Tried again, and the line just hissed like the channel was jammed or out of range. That never happened before. An hour later, he walked past the old toy store and saw something move behind the foggy glass. A figure, tall, thin, dressed in what looked like stripes. The lights were off inside, but the figure stood just far enough into the shadows that only its outline was visible. Chris stood still, waited. The figure did not move. He backed away slowly and turned down a side corridor toward the service area. He told himself it was a reflection or a mannequin left behind when the store closed. But when he passed by again, 15 minutes later, the window was clear and empty. The next time he heard the music, it came from the intercom system, faint but unmistakable, crackling through the ceiling speakers in that slow, off-tempo rhythm. His hands started to shake. He pulled his phone to record it, but the sound stopped the second he opened the camera. Then the lights dimmed, not all of them, just the ones above him. One flickered, then another. The hallway ahead turned darker while the one behind him stayed lit like something wanted him to keep moving forward. As he turned a corner near the old food court, he found a balloon, bright red, floating waist-high and completely still like the air around it had stopped moving. It was tied to nothing, just hovering in place in the center of the hallway. The tile beneath it was smeared with something faint, something dark and sticky. He leaned down and saw the word written in a slow, childlike scrawl, "Smile." That was when the lights behind him shut off one by one. Each pop of a dying bulb echoed down the corridor like footsteps made of sound. Something was coming, and it was close. Chris backed away from the balloon as the lights behind him died in sharp bursts. Each one cracked like glass under pressure and left the corridor darker than before. He felt the weight of the dark pressing in on him. The air was thick and humid now, like something had filled the space with breath. The balloon hadn't moved, still floating at chest level with the word "Smile" written across it in dripping marker. But the hallway behind it was no longer empty. From the shadows near the edge of the food court, a figure stepped forward, slow, deliberate, wearing a suit that looked pieced together from old costume racks, mismatched stripes and oversized buttons sewn in crooked lines. The face was painted, but the paint looked old, caked and flaking at the corners. What stopped Chris cold was the eyes. There was no light in them, just wide-open whites staring directly into his as the figure raised one arm and pointed. Chris ran. He dropped the mop and sprinted down the side hall. His boots slammed against the tile, and every sound echoed back at him louder than it should have, like the building was mocking him. He turned a corner and saw the emergency exit at the end of the service wing. He fumbled with his keyring, hands slippery with sweat, found the right one and shoved it in the lock. It clicked, but the door wouldn't budge, like something was pressed against it on the other side. The intercom came alive again, the same circus melody now louder, distorted. It twisted through the speakers in waves that made his stomach churn. Then a second sound layered beneath it, laughter, quiet at first, but growing. Not a group, just one voice, raspy and gurgling like it was choking between gasps. It was getting closer. Chris turned and bolted back down the hallway. He knew the mall like the back of his hand, but every turn felt unfamiliar now. He passed mannequins leaning in strange angles against display glass. Some of their faces had been drawn on with red lines, smiles too wide and eyes too black. None of them were like that earlier. He ducked into a storage room and slammed the door, locked it and pressed his back to the wall. His breath came in sharp, shallow bursts. From the other side came soft, dragging footsteps. then a tap on the door. Not pounding, just a gentle knock. Over and over. Then silence. The lights flickered inside the room. Once, then again. And then he saw it. In the security monitor mounted in the upper corner of the wall. A grainy feed of the hallway just outside. The figure was standing there, still pointing. But now something was different. It wasn't alone. Behind it stood a second clown, then another. Each one frozen in place. Each one staring directly into the camera. The monitor flashed to black. Then one frame came back for half a second. Chris saw his own face, only it wasn't live. He was lying on the floor with the word "smile" carved into his forehead. The screen went dark again, and the knocking returned. Only this time it was coming from inside the room. When they found Chris the next morning, the lights were all back on, and the building looked normal again. His cleaning cart was still in the main corridor, with the mop leaning against the wall like he had stepped away for a moment. His keys were in the office, and the alarm system showed no activity during the night. But Chris was gone, not a trace. No footprints, no broken locks. Just his phone lying face down in the middle of the food court, with the flashlight still on, and the last picture in his camera roll showing the side of his own face, out of focus, taken from low to the ground, the kind of angle you'd get if someone was crawling. They checked the security feeds, but the entire system had glitched out from 1:30 to just past 4 in the morning. Every camera went black at the same time. Every file corrupted, except one still image that somehow remained on a backup drive. It showed the hallway outside the party store. Empty at first, but in the far background near the edge of the frame stood a faint figure. Striped sleeves, a smile too wide, and 3 red balloons floating just above its head. None of them tied to anything, all of them casting shadows, but the figure cast none at all. No one ever figured out who turned the lights back on, or how the backup camera captured a photo after the system crashed. A week later, a balloon showed up tied to the mall's locked front gate. It had Chris's name written across it in shaky red ink.